controlling their emotions and controlling their expression of emotions. And a lot of times people get mad and frustrated and want to punish them, and they get in trouble instead of getting help and support. So that's a big piece of our work. What we want to do is really help people understand what it looks like when you've experienced trauma. And I'm very, very excited to be able to present the trauma of racism today. Yay, more people. It's so nice to see friendly faces on Zoom and Facebook. The trauma of racism was actually one of the sessions I really wanted to do early on, right out of the gate. When I started to think about racism in the same way I think about trauma, it was it just made so much sense, right? You're having bad experiences and then it plays out in your behavior. And then we look at your behavior and say, see, that's the reason you're having problems, right? And the other big piece with trauma is that when you don't address the issues and the problems, they don't go away. They get louder and louder and louder until you must address them, right? That happens at the individual level, and we see it happening at the social level, right? America's problems with racism are not going anywhere until we're really willing to look at it, confront it, look at ourselves, reflect. So I think this is just one of the most important topics. And certainly we know with the news of the last more than year at this point, we've seen racism play out on the national stage in really terrifying ways, in all honesty. And so I'm super excited to have Dr. Jennifer Carey here. And I was telling Jen before we started that I was really looking forward to getting the chance to introduce her, because in addition to all the really amazing things she's done professionally, she has a PhD, she was Harvard, Radcliffe, worked for the elder affairs in one of the presidential administrations. That's so amazing, right? And so all this stuff, but the way I know Jennifer has been since she's been at WEC, the Worcester Educational Collaborative, which is 10 years now. And I know when WEC first started, I paid attention to what Jen was doing. And she has very consistently and steadily been addressing racism and inequality in our community this whole time. It's really, I'm always really trying to understand what needs to happen for people to move or to understand or to get this. So when I find other people that share that interest and passion, I'm excited. And Jennifer's approach has always been steady and just determined. Jen is not somebody who's going to be in your face challenging you. She's going to challenge you in a way that's much more subtle, that it might take you a little bit to really recognize, but the change will come. And maybe that's a good thing to say too. Whenever we do talk about racism, it's obviously really painful for Black, Indigenous people of color to hear. But for white people that may not have thought about racism at the level that people of color have, things that come up are denial. A lot of times people just want to say, I don't think it's really that bad, or maybe it's about something else. If denial isn't there, then anger comes up, right? It's really hard to hear that people are being treated unfairly. And when you kind of really see that, you get mad. And of course, the other thing that comes up so much, if you are white, is the feeling of guilt, the recognition that you're maybe getting advantages that people aren't getting. You didn't do anything to ask for that or deserve that, or it's just kind of the way things are set up. And when you recognize that the things that might be available to you might not be available to people of color, it's painful. It feels yucky. I think that and I think part of like, we really avoid that feeling of guilt. So white people don't engage a lot with this kind of content because it's painful, right? But once you go there and come out the other side of the pain, it's transformative, right? And I think you can't really stay in that pain, but I think the pain is a necessary part of all things trauma. It's painful. That's why it's trauma. So I'm so excited because I have learned so much more from Jen. This is a topic that I think there's no one and done on racism. There's so much to learn and understand and recognize how it plays out in the world that, everything that gets us a deeper understanding is valuable and important. So I'm going to zip it from there. I say that, but not just yet. And turn it on over to Jennifer. And Jennifer is assisted by the beautiful Julia Kilgore, who's going to be on slide duty. I am going to be on chat duty. If things come up and you want to, have a question for Jen or something really struck you, you can put it in the chat. We'll try to get to it when Jen takes a pause. And certainly we'll have time at the end for whatever you have for questions, comments, thoughts. I'm confident it's going to be a great presentation. And again, audience members, we're really glad you're here. Do whatever makes you feel the most comfortable, camera on or off, have a drink, put your feet up. Take good care of yourself throughout the training. All right, Jen, turning it over.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. Let me also introduce, Julia, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone. Julia, I'm the Deputy Director working with Jen at the Worcester Educational Collaborative. Thanks for being here.
And let me also introduce Emily Dodge, who has just joined the WEC staff. This is day 2 for Emily. So Emily, could you say hello to everyone?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. Very excited to be learning with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Thank you, everyone. So let me tell you a little bit about how we came to be putting this work together. This work has been funded in part by the Health Foundation of Central Massachusetts and in part by the Daniels Foundation. And we came to this work as a result of some work that we've been doing with the Worcester Public Schools. And as Amy said, the topic of trauma and our understanding of trauma and related syndrome is something that really is evolving. And what we'll be talking about today, the concept of racism as trauma and racism related to a relatively new concept called moral injury, is something that is gaining a lot of attention. So why don't we go on? Okay, as Amy said, this is a sensitive topic. It is a emotionally provocative topic. And I can assure you that at some point during this presentation, you will feel uncomfortable. So please exercise self-care. Take a moment to step away if you need to. Take some time to take some deep breaths, have a glass of water, and please come back so that we can close out and be together throughout the entire session. So, Julia, next slide. Okay, we are going to start with a very quick overview of toxic stress and ACEs, or toxic. We use those two words interchangeably. Then we'll go into trauma-related syndromes, shame, and moral injury. And then we'll begin our conversation on racism as trauma. And as Amy said, please use the chat. We will have some opportunities to talk in more detail about some of this work also. Okay, Julia? Okay, so scientists and researchers have identified essentially 3 types of stress. One is positive stress, the other is tolerable stress, and toxic stress. Positive stress, I often refer to as anticipation. It's that sense that you feel first day of work, first day of school, when you are thinking about an exam or a big project, that kind of work that you prepare yourself mentally, physically, emotionally to do. And although it may be something different and unique, you are in control. With tolerable stress, things are less in control. But there are supportive buffers in place. So think about an illness or a death of a family member or a close relation. And there is stress. Things are not in your control, but you do have the buffers and supports in place to see you through it. With toxic stress can take a number of forms. It can be something that's chronic. For example, long-term living in desperate poverty, long-term exposure to violence in the neighborhood, a chronic illness, mental illness, or substance abuse in the family, that sort of thing. And it can be a host of things, but it is either chronic or without the supports. And what may be tolerable stress for one person may be toxic stress for another. So these can once again be overlapping, and we'll often refer to things being overlapping as we're talking more about this topic. Julia? Okay, and stress and toxic stress really does live in the body and can affect the body. There was a study that that really opened this body of research a number of years ago by Kaiser Permanente Healthcare, and they are the big insurer in California. Their insured lives are largely professionals, largely in the Silicon Valley tech field, and other professions. And they did a longitudinal study looking back over time at the mental health and physical manifestations of exposure to toxic stress, and found that people who had been exposed to toxic stress had higher levels of chronic illness, had higher levels of depression, had higher levels of use of substance abuse and substance abuse disorder. If you look at brain scans of people who have been exposed to toxic stress, you see the effect on the brain. The image, these are two PET scans. The image on the left is a so-called healthy brain. And if you look, the areas that are most active on PET scans are the areas that are in red and yellow. And the areas that are least active are the cooler colors, the green, purple, black. And so you can see in the healthy brain, there is yellow and red all across the brain, and in much more prominent than in the brain at the right, which is a brain that's been exposed to toxic stress. Also, if you look at the left-hand image, you'll see that most of the activity is in the front part of the brain, the responsive part of the brain, the quote-unquote rational part of the brain, and less activity in the reactive, the back part of the brain. And if you look at the image on the right, you see the opposite of that. And also on the right, you see these large areas where there is little activity, because most of the energy is going towards the activity at the rear of the brain. Okay, Julia. Now, before we slip into despair, let's talk about neuroplasticity. Scientists and researchers used to believe that the brain was fixed and that somewhere between the age of 12 and 18, the brain reached maturity, and that there was no further development. That idea has been absolutely thrown out. There is brain development, and we are developing new pathways in the brain and reinforcing pathways in the brain throughout the lifespan, really from birth into old age. And so nothing is fixed. And if you think of the brain really as a railroad, the neural connections as a railroad, we are developing those connections. And what we want to do is to begin to train the brain through a variety of ways to use the front responsive part of the brain and to reinforce those pathways through a variety of stress reduction activities, mindfulness, self-care practices, and so forth. So all is not lost. So let's move on, Julia.
Great, thanks, Jen. So, when facing those toxic stress circumstances, individuals react in three common ways. The first is fight, where they try to defeat or disarm what they're viewing as a threat. Flight, where they try to get away from that threat. If you're an individual working with students, this could show up as absenteeism for school. It could show up as just general disengagement. And then we have freeze, which is a more passive form of that disengagement, where an individual may try to kind of become invisible and just to be as non-threatening as possible in any given circumstance. And these are the automatic responses that happen without even thinking about it. And the more toxic stress we are exposed to, the more predominant these automatic responses become. And then with that constant activation of the fight, flight, and freeze response, there are kind of corresponding chemical reactions, and it really starts to take a toll on that body. So as Jen was mentioning, that toxic stress really lives in your body and can have an impact across a lifetime, where you start to experience chronic inflammation, chronic illness, depression. Those are just a few of the physical impacts that toxic stress exposure can have on your body.
Okay. One of the areas that is a shame-related syndrome is probably not the right word, but I will use it for today, is shame. And you often see overlapping and interaction between a shame response and a trauma response. So we're going to talk a little bit about shame. Shame, people often confuse shame or use them interchangeably, shame and guilt, but they're actually two very different things. Shame is a private feeling of being inadequate, of being flawed in some way, and also of being vulnerable. With shame, it's the difference between I did something bad, I dropped the teacup and tea spilled all over the floor, or I am bad. I dropped the teacup, tea spilled all over the floor, and I dropped it because I am clumsy, I am worthless, and I do things like this all the time. With shame, a person's sense of self-worth and dignity really are diminished. And that can become almost part of a person's personality or character. And it really does lead to significant emotional pain about what one is like as a person, not what you did, but who you are, your core sense of identity. So we're going to listen to a short clip. This is from the novel by Sandra Cisneros. Sandra Cisneros is a Latina writer from Chicago, and The House on Mongo Street was her first book. It is a both a novel and in many ways a memoir of her growing up in Chicago. So as you're listening to this, think about those questions that are on the screen. So this is a very short clip. It is Sandra Cisneros actually narrating. So.
The house on Mongo Street. We didn't always live on Mongo Street. Before that, we lived on Loomis on the 3rd floor. And before that, we lived on Keeler. Before Keeler, it was Paulina. And before that, I can't remember. But what I remember most is moving a lot. Each time it seemed there'd be one more of us. By the time we got to Mongo Street, we were 6. Mama, Papa, Carlos, Kiki, my sister Nanny, and me. The house on Mongo Street is ours, and we don't have to pay rent to anybody or share the yard with the people downstairs, or be careful not to make too much noise, and there isn't a landlord banging on the ceiling with a broom. But even so, it's not the house we thought we'd get. We had to leave the flat on Loomis quick. The water pipes broke and the landlord wouldn't fix them because the house was too old. We had to leave fast. We were using the washroom next door and carrying water over in empty milk gallons. That's why Mama and Papa looked for a house. And that's why we moved into the house on Mongo Street, far away on the other side of town. They always told us that one day we would move into a house, a real house that would be ours for always so we wouldn't have to move each year. And our house would have running water and pipes that worked. And inside it would have real stairs, not hallway stairs, but stairs inside like the houses on TV. And we'd have a basement and at least 3 washrooms so when we took a bath we wouldn't have to tell everybody. Our house would be white, with trees around it, a great big yard, and grass growing without a fence. This was the house Papa talked about when he held up a lottery ticket, and this was the house Mama dreamed up in the stories she told us before we went to bed. But the house on Mongo Street is not the way they told it at all. It's small and red with tight steps in front, and windows so small you'd think they were holding their breath. Bricks are crumbling in places, and the front door is so swollen you have to push hard to get in. There is no front yard, only 4 little elms the city planted by the curb. Out back is a small garage for the car we don't own yet, and a small yard that looks smaller between the 2 buildings on either side. There are stairs in our house, but they're ordinary hallway stairs. And the house has only 1 washroom. Everybody has to share a bedroom. Mama and Papa, Carlos and Kiki, me and Nanny. Once, when we were living on Loomis, a nun from my school passed by and saw me playing out front. The laundromat downstairs had been boarded up because it had been robbed 2 days before, and the owner had painted on the wood, "Yes, we're open," so as not to lose business. "Where do you live?" she asked. "There," I said, pointing up to the 3rd floor. "You live there?" There. I had to look to where she pointed. The 3rd floor, the paint peeling, wooden bars Papa had nailed on the window so we wouldn't fall out. "You live there?" The way she said it made me feel like nothing. There. I lived there. I
Julia?
nodded. I knew then I had to have a house, a real house, one I could point to. But this isn't it. The house on Mongo Street isn't it. For the time being, Mama says. Temporary, says Papa. But I know how those things go.
Okay. All right. Julia, are we going to do breakout groups?
Yes, I think we are all set. I'll look to Lori for the go ahead. But what we'll do is I'm going to copy the questions from the screen into the chat, and please do take note of them before we go into the breakouts, because you won't be able to see this image once you're in the breakout room. But we'll have about 10 minutes, and looks like the breakout rooms are opening now. Okay, and if you're still in the main room, you should receive an invitation to join the breakout, and you just have to click join. And if you are just choosing not to participate in the breakout and want to stay in this main room, that's fine as well.
If you wanted to be in a breakout room and aren't able to, I think Julia may be able to send you to one. I think Mandy wanted to be in one and didn't get an invite, Julia.
Oh, okay. Lori, are you able to add Mandy to a breakout room? Or maybe move her from one room to another? Okay, great. Thank you.
Nice.
Mandy, you should be getting an invitation to join.
Good.
Anybody else looking for an invitation to join a room or having difficulty with the breakout? Lori, you might need to try moving Mandy from one room to another to see if we can get a new join prompt. Or Mandy, you may have an option on your bar to join breakout room with the bar at the bottom of your Zoom that gives you some options to like show your video and see the chat. Yeah, and anybody who wants to just stay in this room, that is also fine, no problem. Okay, I think we got Mandy all set. Thank you for helping with that, Lori. Hi, Eve. Are you just joining?
Julia, how much time do we have left?
I think we still have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So Jen, I think for the next breakout, we might get to it before 1.
Okay.
But at about round 1, I think is when we'll need to, if it's after 1, we might need to reconsider.
Okay. All right. That's the girl named Sooner.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
We can just ask people to use the chat then.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if we can do the breakout, I think it would be great, but we'll just see how the timing is.
Okay. Okay.
Because it is a good one to be able to debrief afterwards. And then for the I fit the description later on, maybe we do that one as a group discussion.
Okay.
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 I think I am lost.
Oh, hi, Ruth.
Can you hear me? Because
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah,
I got lost too.
Folks are in breakout groups right now, so we're almost coming to the end of that. So we're not going to put you in a breakout group.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say that, you know, in Worcester, for example, the U.S. Census Bureau report that found that Massachusetts is the worst state for Latinos to live in. And
I
Worcester,
saw that. Yeah, Worcester's the epicenter of our
exactly.
statewide disgrace.
Exactly.
What were the reasons for that? I didn't see that report.
The U.S. Census Bureau report. You can Google it. The worst states for Latinos to live in.
Wow.
We have in Massachusetts, we have the highest Latino youth incarceration. And it goes on and on. And, you know, banks don't give us loans, so we have the lowest home ownership. And Latino students have the highest dropout, and I call it push out. So there's a lot of issues. But one thing that, and I'll say this for the last, one thing that I found when I first started working in the Worcester, you know, in Worcester, was that every time there was an arrest by a Spanish name, the paper would always say Puerto Rican arrested, and the name would be in bold letters. And one day I asked a reporter, I said, well, I don't see you saying Irish, you know, arrested or British arrested. Why do you put Puerto Rican arrested? And I know that we in the community had some issues because there were a couple of times when they said Puerto Rican arrested and the person was not Puerto Rican. But that's how it came. And so one day I applied for an apartment, and it was a beautiful apartment, and I filled out the form. As we were leaving, the realtor, she said to me, I'll call you Monday if you are approved and you can come and sign. And then she goes, by the way, where are you from? I said, well, I was born in the Dominican Republic. And she looked at me and she goes, oh, good, because the owners hate Puerto Ricans. I mean, and that was then when Dominicans we were maybe like 3 families. They wouldn't say that now, because, you know, but that's my experience in the city. And
that's supposed to make you feel better. Oh, we only discriminate against Puerto Ricans, not
exactly. Exactly. So when she called me on Monday to tell me I was approved, I said, I am so sorry because I really love the apartment, but there's no way I can move into an apartment with the owners. Hey, they're like my family. I mean, Puerto Ricans are all that I know. And she was like, oh, whoa, you know. But that's what happens in the city, you know. And the paper never used to write anything positive about our community. And at one time, Father Bafaro took me in a meeting, and we showed them, you know, what they were doing. And you know, the editor was so embarrassed because I brought the article that they have posted. There were like 10 people arrested, only 4 were Latino name, and the only names in bold letter were the Latino names. And it's everywhere, you know. I mean, we're targeted. And like I said, you know, ever since this president came out, you know, Mexicans are all drug dealers and blah, blah, blah. We have been paying for that, you know, everywhere we go.
Julia, are folks about to come out of breakout? Oh, everyone's back. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Would someone like to share out on the questions? Would someone like to share what their group talked about?
We had one member of our group is in Canada, and she's an Indigenous person, and she talked about her own experience with a nun, and the feeling that she was an other and didn't fit in anywhere. And it hit home. It was very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. Anyone else?
We actually talked about well, we started talking about what it's like to be a mixed kid. For me, I grew up here in the US. I was born here, but my mom is from Ecuador and my dad is from Japan, and he's actually Scottish and Japanese. So the way that I experienced race in general throughout my life, it kind of felt like I wasn't Spanish enough for the Spanish people, not Asian enough for the Asian people, not white enough for the white people, you know. So really all I felt similar to and undiscriminated against was with my siblings, you know, because they were the only ones that were mixed like me. So I feel like that made a huge impact on how I see the world and also how people see me, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Jazz. What did people think about the interaction between the nun? What do you hear in Esperanza's voice when the nun says to her, where do you live? And Esperanza answers. And what do you hear in Esperanza's voice when she answers versus what the nun's response is?
I think she wasn't kind of proud to tell her where she lived. She's kind of hesitant, you know, to open up a little more.
And what's Esperanza's reaction? How does Esperanza react to the nun? What's Esperanza's reaction to the question, to the nun's response?
I think this is Mandy. Sorry, I'm not using my camera right now, but I think she was hesitant to say anything because of, you know, when people say things, I don't think they think about what somebody else is thinking. They're not mindful and how somebody else is feeling or thinking. So when the nun had said to her, you know, oh, you live there, it brought back like, should I be worried or sad or mad that I live there? Because she didn't know any better. She didn't know that there was negative. You know, she didn't understand that until somebody made it be a problem. It wasn't a problem for her in her mind.
Yeah. So she for the first time sees how she is regarded through another person's eyes. There's a concept that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about called double consciousness. And that is the point at which he's specifically referring to Black people. But I think it can be expanded to refer to any sort of quote unquote outsider group, which is the point at which you recognize how you're regarded by others. And I think that's one of the things that's extraordinarily powerful about this. And I am certain, at least from my reading of this, that the nun did not intend to make a hurtful or offensive remark. But I think these kinds of statements fall out of people's mouths all the time. No one is exempt from this. And it's the kind of remark that allows the person that we're speaking to get an insight into how they're regarded, at least by us. And this remark by the nun triggers that shame reaction when Esperanza says, I live there. And she mimics the way the nun said it, that she had never considered herself living there. It was always just where she lived. So any other comments before we move on? No. Okay, Julia. And feel free to use the chat.
Yes, definitely. So as Mandy, as you commented, we're not always mindful of what other people are going through or what our remarks may trigger. And our words and our tone really matter, especially in our work with young people. So while we may not be conscious of the nuances of how we communicate, it's important to recognize that we may demonstrate inadvertent shaming behaviors without realizing it. So some of the common inadvertent shaming behaviors can be seen in our body language, as we heard in that clip, through the tone of our voice, the "you live there" piece of that. It could also look like an adult, a trusted adult, having apathy towards students' concerns or experiences, or even just failing to address any sort of bullying or peer conflict or some sort of challenge that you may be witnessing a student having. So yes, we wanted to share that as a kind of just a reminder of how important it is to try to have that empathy and that perspective in your work, and think about not only the words that you're saying, but what kinds of triggers they may reach in students.
I think related to that, it's also important to think about when we are silent or when we fail to take someone's concern seriously, that apathetic response. Amy, as you're saying in the chat, not saying anything sends a message also. You know, there's that meme that goes around constantly. What I will remember are not the words of my enemies, but the silence of my friends. And so, you know, a prime example, at least from the school world, is when bullying is not addressed, because what it says to kids is that your concern is just not that important. And I think we do that with matters of race. We do that with all kinds of things. So now, one of the important things to think about when we think about the shame response is that it is almost identical. In fact, it is identical to the trauma response, to the response to adversity. There's the fight, the flight, the freeze, and then there's also the devaluing. You know, we've seen that. You know, I'm not going to do this stupid homework assignment. You know, if you're struggling with that. I remember in elementary school, we were learning to play baseball, and I could not hit the ball, and, you know, dropped the bat, threw the bat down, and said, I'm not playing this stupid game anymore. You know, because of my shame at my being unable to hit. Often, though, and we often see this with kids, they feel a sense of shame for something, but it's adults react to it as if it is anger. And when what they're really seeing is the fight response. And the kid is often punished for that kind of fight response. When kids get belligerent. I remember when I was working in the financial aid office of a college, and one of my students, it was registration day, and one of my students went up to one of my colleagues who didn't know this kid. And the kid was really belligerent. And because the financial aid officer said to her, there's a problem with your registration. And she immediately got her back up, got belligerent. What I heard, because I knew this kid, was her fear of not being able to register and not being able to be in school that semester, and the shame associated with her family struggle to pay her tuition. And so I had to intervene and help the other financial aid officer understand what was really going on here. I essentially said, listen, hon, come over here. We'll work it out before you blow a gasket here. So, you know, I think it's what the surface behavior is, and then what the meaning behind that behavior is critically important. Julia, next slide. Okay, we're going to shift to the concept of moral injury. This is a relatively new concept that actually emerged from the world of the military, with soldiers returning, with combat veterans returning home. And often the combat veterans had witnessed or been participants in or victims of something that was an essential affront to their sense of right and wrong. If you think about what we've talked about before, earlier, adversity and toxic stress can take the form of physical adversity, emotional adversity, but moral injury really does take us to the level of the spiritual. Some people refer to it as an injury to the soul. It is a complete breach of anyone's sense of right and wrong, of fairness, of ethics, of morality. And there's often an authority involved in that. And this sort of injury, this moral injury, can have deep impact on people. And it's often something that, because this is a relatively new concept that we don't deal with and address, the reactions are often similar to what we see in the other trauma reactions: fight, flight, freeze. But the fight piece of it, with an underlayer of anger, is often what is a mark of moral injury. So Julia, let's move on. Okay. So the key elements are a betrayal of core understandings, either of the individual or of the individual and what a culture and society's espoused values are. So that sort of betrayal is at the heart of it. The other is that there's a piece of it that is associated with some sort of legitimate authority, or by oneself, an action that you took, that you did. And it involves a high stakes situation. So the same way this emerged from the military, we often see in young people, you see this often in kids who are gang involved, where they have been witness to or victim of, or participants in an action or an activity that they know is wrong, but have been involved in. You often see it in victims of sexual abuse, where there is that sense of betrayal that underlies what's going on. So, Julia?
So yeah, so there are, within all those examples, there are 3 different roles an individual can take in relation to the event that causes moral injury. So you can be the perpetrator of the action, you can be the bystander or witness to the action, or a victim of the action. And each of these roles tends to overlap, and we'll actually watch a clip shortly, and you'll see that an individual can move from one role to another within kind of the same circumstance. And then there are just a couple different moral injury events. So these are some of the examples Jen was sharing. Seeing things that are morally wrong, like witnessing violence in the home, acting in ways that violate your own morals or values. If you're, from the military example, if you're forced to act as part of that military system and forced to do things that are against your morals or values, that can result in moral injury. From the education perspective, it could be having to enforce a zero tolerance discipline policy, for example, even though you know that type of disciplinary action is against what you believe in or what your morals or values are. You could also experience moral injury by failing to act. So, witnessing something as a bystander, perhaps bullying between some students at school, and not intervening can result in moral injury. And then finally, feeling betrayed by a trusted person. We know how important trusting relationships are, especially for our young people. So having any sort of break or rift in that relationship can result in moral injury for students.
Okay. And as we can see, while this emerged from concepts associated with combat veterans, it's not limited to the military. It can be anyone who feels betrayed or hurt or shamed. And Amy put something in the chat. This is very much associated with shame and the concept of guilt. Because moral injury pushes someone into the realm of, I am bad, I am flawed, I am deficient. Can also be, as we can see, the perpetrator, someone who inflicted a harm on a loved one or on a community while they were involved with drugs or alcohol, or while suffering from mental health issues. It can also be someone who has been verbally, physically, or sexually abused or emotionally abused, or someone who has witnessed any of these things. So that dynamic and that shifting and overlapping dynamic of victim, witness, perpetrator are also important. Okay. So let's move on, Julia. Okay. And the consequences of moral injury are profound and the same as they are with any sort of trauma or adversity. Can lead to serious depression, to serious distress, and in the most extreme circumstances, to suicide. Persistent feelings of guilt and rage, and the associated shame. I also would like to suggest that that moral injury cannot just affect individuals, but it can affect entire communities. I'd like us all to think back to how we felt on January 6th, witnessing the events in Washington, D.C. If you think back to how you felt on that day, that will give you an idea of what moral injury is. For the individual, it can create a sense of, to use religious terms, sinfulness, to use more civic terms, a sense of moral defilement or ethical compromise. And it can lead to a loss of confidence, not just in oneself, but in a loss of confidence in systems. Again, think of how we all felt on January 6th. And that is an example of communities experiencing moral injury. And I also want us to think about this when we start specifically talking about racism as trauma, and I would suggest racism as a form of moral injury. So let's move on, Julia. Okay, this is a clip from a movie that came out way back in the 1970s. I will warn you, it is very difficult to watch. It is about a little girl named Sooner, who comes from a rural area. Her mother suffers from mental illness and they live in persistent poverty. So she has been removed from the home and is being fostered by another family in town. And she's having trouble adjusting to her new school and adjusting to the mother in the family is having trouble adjusting to having a child in the home. For those of you who are in my age group, if you have the nagging question of who are those actors and actresses, the actress is Lee Remick and the actor is Richard Crenna. So, Julia, we could start. It is a little choppy because this is, as I said, very old.
Teddy bear, tie your shoe. Teddy bear, 23 sticks.
Well, hurry up. We haven't got all day.
That's me, Judith Ann.
Well, she's too dumb anyways if she can't even write.
Let me try again. I can do it. I can.
Oh, you can, don't. Get out of the way, you dummy.
Teddy bear, pull your wig.
You didn't have to come and get me. I could have walked home with all the other kids.
Well, tomorrow you can. I just wanted to make sure you knew the way. Did you get to skip rope at recess the way you wanted?
It's hard.
Well, not when you know how. What you need is one of your own so you can practice.
Touch the ground. Teddy bear, tie your shoe. Teddy bear, 23 sticks. Teddy bear, point to the side. Teddy bear, show it right side.
And again, the Indians were forced to move farther west. Since we finished our lessons a few minutes early, I thought you might like to talk about the pets you keep at home. I imagine some of you have very interesting ones.
I got me a garter snake while back. I keep him in an aquarium and I feed him hamburger.
That's what I feed my turtle, a real box turtle.
Sooner.
I got me a bird. So, lots of kids got canaries. And a canary.
Isn't. What kind of bird is he, Sooner?
He's just a bird.
You mean he's a wild bird? Do you keep him in a cage?
Oh, no, ma'am. Wild critters, they don't take the cages. He's got a perch. That's for inside. Outside, he's just loose.
Why don't he fly off then?
Doesn't he fly off? Sooner.
He just doesn't, that's all.
All right, class, that's all for today.
What's his name, Sooner? How big is he?
Sure would like to see your bird.
Where do you live?
Why can't he fly? Could I come home with you, Sooner?
How about saying hello when you come home?
I got some kids with me. 5 whole kids. And they come to see Bird.
I've got some cookies ready. I'll get them.
Wow. Oh, he's pretty. Oh, he's pretty. Where'd you get him? Look at his hair. Wow, he's pretty. Oh, he's nice. Look at him. Oh, sure he won't fly off?
Yep.
I bet he would if he got scared.
No, he wouldn't.
See? Go, Bird. Fly. Come on. Come on, Bird.
Fly.
Come on. Go, Bird. Go, Bird. Go. He isn't really scared, that's all. He knows we're just fooling. That's why he won't fly. Come on.
Well, I got a nickel. Let's go to the candy store and get some shoelaces. I like licorice. He won't fly no matter what. I'll show you.
Let me try too. Crazy bird will fly no matter what. Come on, bird.
Sooner! What on earth are you doing? What kind of a child are you to kill your own pet? Get upstairs!
She was cold as ice. And she won't say anything. It's as if she were in shock. Never should have left her alone.
You listen to me, Mac. I accepted it when you brought her here, and I accepted it when Phil wanted her to go to school, but I can't accept any more.
Elizabeth, you know well that Sooner's not a vicious child.
Okay. We can stop there, Julia. And we're going to post some questions in the chat. And Julia, are we going to do breakout groups?
Jen, I think we're going to lose the recording if we do that. Oh, wait.
Okay.
I guess not, because Lori Russ is inviting us to do breakout groups. So, yeah, we're doing breakout groups.
Okay. And we'll be in for about 10 minutes, Julia?
A little less this time, 8 minutes.
Okay, 8 minutes. Okay.
You should have received an invite, and if you didn't, we can hopefully help you get another one.
Yeah, actually, because Lori's a little caught up, she won't be able to support with juggling people around. But
okay,
I was thinking, Amy, we could, if anybody wants to have discussion in this main room, we can just facilitate here.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Julia. Okay,
that sounds great.
Okay, it looks like everybody's in that wants to be in a group, and we can start this conversation now. So folks who are in this room, let's think about how did Sooner, and you can, if you click on your chat, you'll see the questions. How does Sooner experience moral injury? Would someone like to talk about that?
Hi, it's Carrie.
Oh, hey, Carrie.
All right. I'm sorry if I cut out. My internet's really thready, but
okay.
You know, I think she knew that what they were doing with the bird was wrong. But her desire to fit in with that new group of friends was so strong that she didn't know how not to participate in that. And you could tell she wanted to protect the bird, but at the same time felt like she needed to live up to their expectations and do what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and given that, thank you, Carrie, for that. Given that, what does that tell you about who the authority is in this? Because remember, moral injury often requires some sort of authority that holds an expectation for a certain type of behavior. So who's the authority here? Carrie, you said it. Who's the authority?
It's the other kids.
That's right. It's the peer group.
It's the kid with the loudest voice in the room.
Right. And and think about, when there's bullying behavior on the playground, it's often a group of kids, and that no single one of those kids, it's unlikely that they would behave that way, but they behave very differently when there's a group and there's some sort of group expectation for how kids should behave. In this scene, who's the victim, who's the bystander, and who's the perpetrator? Carrie, you might be the only person really here.
Am I the only real person here?
I think so.
Maybe you are.
Well, that's pretty
right,
funny.
we'll pick on you then.
Oh my gosh, this is what happens when your internet's bad. I don't know. I mean, that it's kind of hard. I mean, I'm interested in hearing you guys' analysis of that.
The way I look at it, you see Sooner is all three of those. She's the victim because it's her pet, and she's the one that's going to suffer emotionally from this the most. Right. Although I would suggest that the other kids realize that they've done something wrong also.
But they didn't until the woman came out and said how cruel and monstrous a child she was for killing her pet. Mm-hmm. They were, they didn't see that. I don't think they saw their behavior as wrong up until that moment,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Sooner's also the bystander because she doesn't know what to do. Like you said, Carrie, she doesn't know how to respond to this. She doesn't know how to stand up for what she knows is right and not alienate these kids who she's dying to be a part of. And clearly she's also the perpetrator. She throws as many stones as all of the other kids. What about the mother? From my sense, the mother just throws gasoline on this by saying to, what kind of child would kill their own pet? And then at the father in the last scene that we watched says, that Sooner is not a vicious child. And yet the mother responded to her as if she were a vicious child. Instead of this kind of behavior being out of character for Sooner. And you think of the way that kids get labeled, that communities get labeled. You see all of this play out just in this little short clip from this ancient movie. So.
Well, I think that, the mother had a really idealized image of a child as well. And what happened in that scene really kind of broke that image for her. Mm-hmm. She was expecting, I don't know, so if the kids don't accept you playing jump rope, the answer is we get you a jump rope and then you'll be okay. Oh, right. You've got kids coming over after school. Well, I made cookies. Instead of me kind of keeping an eye on this group of kids, I'm going to go get cookies. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right. She didn't realize that it was not the Donna Reed show, or that this wasn't, Leave It to Beaver that she was dealing with.
Right. So I think that probably magnified her shock at the situation when she walked out and observed what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, looks like people are starting to make their way back in. I think everybody will be back in the next 30 seconds or so.
Okay. Julia, do you want to do the share out with people?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, I think almost everyone is back.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. So would anybody like to share out from your groups what you were discussing?
Yes, so this is Kwame. In our group, we spoke about how easy it is to go from a victim to a perpetrator, and then also to go to a bystander mode. And I think we shared about when all the children were gathered in front of Sonia's house, watching the bird and everything that just transpired. And then we also spoke about how maybe even the children didn't know from wrong from right. So some of their behaviors, you really can't, hold them accountable because sometimes kids just do stuff without thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame.
Thank you. Yeah, we see that often. I think Jen mentioned it earlier that the roles tend to overlap and intersect, and you can easily move from one role to another. Does anybody else want to share out from their group? Yes,
we talked about a little bit about how it impacts our relationship with clients. And I'm an attorney, so my relationship with clients is a little different. But I mentioned to JP, who was the other person in our group, that I had been, when I first started practicing, I had 2 divorce cases. And in one case, I represented a woman who had been abused by her husband. He was a bouncer, big guy. She was probably 75 pounds soaking wet. And she ended up back with him. And it was a moral injury. I felt a moral injury because I wasn't able to have her see the way I saw things. I don't know whether I was a perpetrator or a victim or what, but it left me with a bad feeling that this was 30 years ago. So
And
it's
you're still thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody want to reflect on the role of the peers in this scene that we watched?
Well, the little girl who wouldn't let her jump rope was clearly a perpetrator. I heard a voice say, "That's mean." So somebody tried to intervene, but didn't take it too far. The others were all bystanders and just stayed in line and took their turns jumping rope.
Yep.
And
how about the role of the mother or the foster mother?
Yeah.
Well, she couldn't have said it worse if she'd tried.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. All right.
Well, it showed how easily something said can injure a person, a grown-up even, but particularly a child, and how it influences the way they react then when she so badly needed them to like her and went along with what was going on just so she wouldn't be rejected again. It's so easy to do. And so everlasting for a lot of kids.
Yes, thank you, Faye. Yeah, the foster mother really didn't help the situation at all. There was a missed opportunity there to maybe turn that into a learning opportunity, or to ask some questions, try to do some understanding about what was going on. As Jen says, she came out and really just threw fuel on the fire. So it's good that we can recognize that and think about that. Any other questions you wanted to explore, Jen, before we move on?
No, I think we can move on. And people should feel free to use the chat. So.
Okay, and thank you. We know that's always a tough clip to watch. So thank you for engaging and doing the breakouts.
So we can move on then, Julia.
Oops, sorry, it's frozen. Here we go. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the right screen share up.
Okay.
That's what's going on. Okay, there is the slides you're looking for.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to make a shift to racism, and I'd like you to think, as we've what we've talked about so far this morning, or this afternoon, we've talked about shame and we've talked about moral injury. We're now going to talk about racism, and I would suggest that racism, one, is a form of trauma, and it's a form of trauma that has elements of shame and has elements of moral injury. And it's something that, like moral injury, not just affects the target, but affects bystanders and affects perpetrators. So again, it's very complex, and we'll be trying to bring these themes together. So I consider racism in many ways a form of 1,000 tiny cuts. You know, we live in Massachusetts. We tend not to encounter people with sheets and hoods, but it's more the kind of subtle, the concept of microaggressions, the small acts that can erode day by day. So let's just define racism, and this will just be our working definition for today, but it is a system, and that's critically important, a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on a social interpretation of how one looks or where one comes from that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities, and unfairly advantages other individuals and communities. The belief that a particular race is superior to another, and that a person's social and moral traits are predetermined, and in some cases people believe determined from birth or determined genetically. And that they're related to a person's inborn biological characteristics. And I suggest that racism is a form of moral injury. Julia, next slide. Okay, and why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because racism is a social determinant of health, of mental health, and of well-being that has a profound impact on individuals, communities, and on our society overall. And that racism, as we've talked about, does indeed create moral injury. And while some trauma is rooted in fear, fear of physical compromise or emotional compromise, moral injury is rooted in shame. To experience racism is to experience shame and to experience moral injury. And racism is a trauma, and like other traumas, there is a dose response. We use the image of the fish in the fishbowl because racism is so pervasive. It's almost like we are all fish in a bowl of water. Try telling a fish it's in a bowl of water, and it's like, what the heck is water? So let's move on, Julia.
Great. So racism is expressed at 4 different levels. The personal level includes the privately held beliefs, prejudices, and ideas that individuals have. And this can show up in a couple of different ways. There's, the one that we most commonly think of where there's the prejudice an individual has towards others of a different race. It also includes internalized racism, where a person of color, either consciously or unconsciously, starts to accept and internalize the negative stereotypes and biases that are pervasive in that fishbowl in the society around them. And it also includes internalized privilege, which are internalized beliefs about superiority or entitlement of white people. And then this personal level of racism relates to the interpersonal level, which is where those personal beliefs lead to actions and behaviors towards other individuals that either intentionally or unintentionally express prejudice, hate, or bias on the basis of race. And those personal, interpersonal levels of racism are what a lot of people think about when they think about racism. But racism goes beyond that and also takes place at an institutional level and a structural level. At the institutional level, that's where you see policies and practices that produce racially inequitable outcomes and really disadvantaging people of color and advantaging white people. And it takes place within an institution. And then structural racism takes place across institutions and across societies. So really when those systems and institutional racism and individual and interpersonal level racism all start to interact as a larger system to compound and perpetuate racial inequity. So you may see broad public policy, or institutional practices, or societal norms at the structural level of racism. And each of those levels is constantly intersecting and interacting and creating a cumulative effect over time. If we look at the example of housing in the US, for decades, redlining practices led to people of color being denied mortgages, which prevented the accumulation of wealth through home ownership. So there's that structural component there. Today, it's held up at the institutional level where banks continue to deny people of color mortgages due to lower assets or wealth, which has resulted from the structural level. And also at the institutional interpersonal level, people of color are more likely to report racial discrimination when they're trying to buy or rent a house. And even if they are a homeowner, they may experience interpersonal or individual racism in the encounters that they have in that neighborhood or through internalized feelings of oppression or internalized privilege and beliefs around home ownership. So as Jen said early on, a lot of these concepts do intersect and overlap. And there's another example here of how each of these levels can interact with each other.
Okay. And racism is a social disease that spreads virally. And it spreads in the same way that violence spreads. The more likely you are to experience racism, the more likely that others around you are also likely to experience it. It spread not just through, as Julia pointed out, not just spread through interpersonal contact, but it spread through media, through cultural norms. It is expressed by our laws and policies. And we have, as a culture, we've treated the symptoms, but we've never begun to treat or discuss what the root causes are. And this is something that I think is very important. It is pervasive, and every person of color has experienced it at every level and through those 1,000 tiny cuts that I talked about earlier. Julia? Okay. In 2019, so it's been less than 2 years, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, issued its first policy statement on racism's impact on child health. Now, I often say people of color have been saying this for generations, and it wasn't taken seriously until a white man in a white coat said it. And it's also very recently that the CDC has indicated that racism is a social determinant of health and something that we need to address. So let's move on. Okay, Amy, you're going to take us through this?
Oh, I wasn't ready on the mute. Sorry about that. I'm good? Now you can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, this material, if you are white and you haven't thought a lot about this, what might come up for you is anger, guilt, disbelief. But, please try to tamp your defenses down as best you can and really consider what they're saying in the exercise. And we'll talk about it on the other side.
I have white privilege, and Andy has white privilege, and your wife, Allison, has white privilege. I love the video that y'all did together. Can we share that? Do you mind if we show that,
Yeah,
what
please.
you and Allison did?
Absolutely, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Check your privilege edition. Put a finger down if you have been called a racial slur. Put a finger down if you've been followed in a store unnecessarily. Put a finger down if someone has crossed the street to avoid passing you. Put a finger down if you've had someone clench their purse in an elevator with you. Put a finger down if you've had someone step off of an elevator to keep from riding with you. Put a finger down if you've been accused of not being able to afford something expensive. Put a finger down if you have had fear in your heart when being stopped by the police. Put a finger down if you have never been given a pass on a citation that you deserved. Put a finger down if you have been stopped or detained by police for no valid reason. Put a finger down if you have been bullied solely because of your race. Put a finger down if you have been denied service solely because of the color of your skin. Put a finger down if you've ever had to teach your child how not to get killed by the police. Any fingers left? That's privilege.
Yeah.
That was awesome, Twitch.
I would have put a finger down on all of those. It was just because the first 10 applied, but then the next 2 did as well.
Yeah, you said that it started conversations with Allison that you've never had.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I ended up with one finger standing, and I live a life of privilege, and yet, so 1,000 tiny cuts. Okay, Julia?
Absolutely.
Amy?
I think it is, the slide you have with the fish in the fishbowl. We really have organized ourselves and our society around like segregation and not seeing this. If you are white, so I'll just talk a little bit about, kind of my own understanding. I grew up in a suburb of Worcester, and my town is high 90% white, as are the other towns that make up the school district that I grew up in. As a young person in school, there was never, ever any sort of classroom academic conversation about racism. None, actually, in any way, shape, or form. And I was absolutely taught that racism is bad things white people say to Black people, or it's all about the interpersonal level, and it just shows up in that space. And of course, I'm a kind person, and so I really was, well, I'm not racist. Where are all these people that are so racist? Not in my town. And one of the really more famous articles about this is called The Invisibility of Privilege. And that's what that is, right? Like I think when you have privilege, you don't even notice it, because for you, it's just, of course, this is the way things are. Of course, my teachers look like me. Of course, they understand where I'm from. Of course, they don't make fun of the house I live in, right? Those are things that we really get to take for granted. And it really has to be shown to us, I think, that lots of people don't get to take these things for granted. And I think, one of the things I've learned so much through pandemic is how much our culture is all about individual responsibility. And it really detracts from the big systems level issues, right? Like we don't look at what's going on because we're so in our own experiences. As a social worker, and I know there's some other social workers here, we really consider inequality the root cause of most of the mental health problems we see. So of course, when you begin to have relationships with people that don't share your race, and see the ways that they have been harmed by racism, I think there's some moral injury there. We kind of have to let go of how we want to imagine this problem and this idea that we're not a part of it. But it's our problem, white people. We're the ones causing the problem. And it's painful. And it's because it's trauma all around, we do things to keep ourselves safe, defense mechanisms, not thinking about it. It's not that big a deal. All of these things that come up are to keep us from going to the place of like moral injury, recognizing that we might want to think of ourselves as good, kind people that really care about others. But if we're unquestioningly participating in other people's oppression, those two things don't line up. So we either have to change our behavior or work real hard to not ever look at that, never look at the harm we're doing. And it's definitely been a year where it's been really hard if you don't see the harm we're doing. I'm not sure where you've been.
Thank you, Amy. Should we move on? Why don't we skip this slide just because I'm concerned about time.
Okay, great, yes.
And Julia, do we have time for this?
I love it.
Okay, all right. We're gonna
I was muted. Yeah, I think we should do this one.
I fit the description.
Okay.
By Stephen Locke. I fit.
Just because I don't have the image on when you're listening to it, I wanted to quickly show you that this is the Stephen Locke who is reading the passage.
I fit the description by Stephen Locke. This is what I wore to work today. On my way to get a burrito before work, I was detained by the police. I noticed the police car in the public lot behind Center Street. As I was walking away from my car, the cruiser followed me. I walked down Center Street and was about to cross over to the burrito place, and the officer got out of the car. "Hey, my man," he said. He unsnapped the holster of his gun. I took my hands out of my pockets. "Yes," I said. "Where you coming from?" "Home." "Where's home?" "Dedham." "How did you get here?" "I drove." He was next to me now. 2 other police cars pulled up. I was standing in front of the bank across the street from the burrito place. I was going to get lunch before I taught my 1:30 class. There were cops all around me. I said nothing. I looked at the officer who addressed me. He was white, stocky, bearded. "You weren't over there, were you?" He pointed down Center Street toward Hyde Square. "No, I came from Dedham." "What's your address?" I told him. "We had someone matching your description just try to break into a woman's house." A second police officer stood next to me. White, tall, bearded. 2 police cruisers passed and would continue to circle the block for the 35 minutes I was standing across the street from the burrito place. "You fit the description," the officer said. Black, male, knit hat, puffy coat. "Do you have identification?" "It's in my wallet." "May I reach into my pocket and get my wallet?" "Yeah." I handed him my license. I told him it did not have my current address. He walked over to a police car. The other cop, taller, wearing sunglasses, told me that I fit the description of someone who broke into a woman's house, right down to the knit cap. Barbara Sullivan made a knit cap for me. She knitted it in pinks and browns and blues and oranges and lime green. No one has a hat like this. It doesn't fit any description that anyone would have. I looked at the second cop. I clasped my hands in front of me to stop them from shaking. For the record, I said to the second cop, I'm not a criminal. I'm a college professor. I was wearing my faculty ID around my neck, clearly visible with my photo. You fit the description, so we just have to check it out. The first cop returned and handed me my license. We have the victim, and we need her to take a look at you to see if you are the person. It was at that moment that I knew that I was probably going to die. I'm not being dramatic when I say this. I was not going to get into a police car. I was not going to present myself to some victim. I was not going to let someone tell the cops that I was not guilty when I already told them that I had nothing to do with any robbery. I was not going to let them take me anywhere, because if they did, the chance I was going to be accused of something I did not do rose exponentially. I knew this in my heart. I was not going anywhere with these cops, and I was not going to let some white woman decide whether or not I was a criminal, especially after I told them I was not a criminal. This meant that I was going to resist arrest. This meant that I was not going to let the police put their hands on me. If you are wondering why people don't go with the police, I hope this explains it for you. Something weird happens when you're on the street being detained by the police. People look at you like you're a criminal. The police are detaining you, so clearly you must have done something. Otherwise, they wouldn't have you. No one made eye contact with me. I was hoping that someone I knew would walk down the street or come out of one of the shops or get off the 39 bus or come out of JP Licks and say to these cops, "That's Steve Locke. What the fuck are you detaining him for?" The cops decided that they would bring the victim to come view me on the street. They asked me to wait. I said nothing. I stood still. "Thanks for cooperating," the second cop said. "This is probably nothing, but it's our job and you do fit the description. 5'11", black male, 160 pounds or so, but you're a little more than that. Knit hat, a little more than 160? Thanks for that," I thought. An older white woman walked up behind me to the second cop. She turned and looked at me and then back at him. "You guys sure are busy today." I noticed the black woman further down the block. She was small and concerned. She was watching what was going on. I focused on her red coat. I slowed my breathing. I looked at her from time to time. I thought, "Don't leave, sister. Please, don't leave." The first cop said, "Where do you teach?" "Massachusetts College of Art and Design." I tugged at the lanyard that had my ID. "How long you been teaching there?" 13 years. We stood in silence for about 10 minutes. An unmarked police car pulled up. The first cop went over to talk to the driver. The driver kept looking at me as the cop spoke to him. I looked directly at the driver. He got out of the car. "I'm Detective Cardoza. I appreciate your cooperation." I said nothing. "I'm sure these officers told you what is going on." "They did." "Where are you coming from?" "From my home in Dedham." "How did you get here?" "I drove." "Where is your car?" "It's in the lot behind Bukhara." I pointed up Center Street. "Okay," the detective said. "We're going to let you go. Do you have a car key that you can show me?" "Yes," I said. "I'm going to reach into my pocket and pull out my car key." "Okay." I showed him the key to my car. The cops thanked me for my cooperation. I nodded and turned to go. "Sorry for screwing up your lunch break," the second cop said. I walked back toward my car, away from the burrito place. I saw the woman in red. "Thank you," I said to her. "Thank you for staying." "Are you okay?" she said. Her small, beautiful face was lined with concern. "Not really. I'm shook up, and I have to get to work." I knew something was wrong. I was watching the whole thing. The way they are treating us now, you have to watch them. "I'm so grateful you were there." I kept thinking to myself, "Don't leave, sister. May I give you a hug? Yes, she said. She held me as I shook. Are you sure you are okay? No, I'm not. I'm gonna have a good cry in my car. I have to go teach. You're at Mass Heart. My friend is at Mass Heart. What's your name? She told me. I realized we were Facebook friends. I told her this. I'll check in with you on Facebook, she said. I put my head down and walked to my car. My colleague was in our shared office and he was able to calm me down. I had about 45 minutes until my class began and I had to teach. I forgot the lesson I had planned. I forget the schedule. I couldn't think about how to do my job. I thought about the fact my word counted for nothing. They didn't believe that I wasn't a criminal. They had to find out. My word was not enough for them. My ID was not enough for them. My handmade, one-of-a-kind knit hat was an object of suspicion. My Ralph Lauren quilted blazer was only a puffy coat. A white woman could just walk up to a cop and talk about me like I was an object for regard. I wanted to go back and spit in their faces. The cops were probably deeply satisfied with how they handled the interaction, how they didn't escalate the situation, how they were respectful and polite. I imagine sitting in the back of a police car while a white woman decides if I'm a criminal or not. If I looked guilty being detained by the cops, imagine how vile I become sitting in a cruiser. I knew I could not let that happen to me. I knew if that were to happen, I would be dead. Nothing I am, nothing I do, nothing I have means anything because I fit the description. I had to confess to my students that I was a bit out of it today, and I asked them to bear with me. I had to teach. After class, I was supposed to go to the openings for First Friday. I went home.
Okay, so we are actually short on time, so we're going to abbreviate some of this. So, Julia, do you want to put up the questions? And I'm just going to go quickly through these. One of the things that I'm hoping people heard in that were, one, the expressions of trauma that you hear described by Professor Locke. The other is the clear sense of moral injury, that he has been offended, that he feels betrayed, and that the authority is not just the individual policeman who stopped him, but that the authority is the system, the criminal justice system that labeled him because he fit the description. Now, this is not about whether or not this was a quote unquote good or bad police stop. This is about the reaction of the individual and how this exemplifies the reaction of a system as it comes down on an individual. So, okay, I'm gonna, because we've only got about 6 minutes, and I want us to all think about how we talked about the intersecting roles of victim, perpetrator, and bystander. This is not just a police problem. This is not just a problem of who the authority is, but this is our problem. And because we have all been exposed to this social disease, we all are carrying this virus in some way, shape, or form. So let's quickly take a look at this. This is a very quick video, and we may go slightly above past 2, but I ask you to bear with us. So.
There's a new study out of the Yale Child Study Center that I had to read a few times just to believe what it was telling me. The researchers recruited about 135 preschool teachers. They had them watch video footage of 4 kids playing, a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they told the teachers, their subjects, watch the video, there may be some challenging behaviors. As soon as you see something that could become challenging, hit the enter key on your keypad. Well, here's the trick. there was no challenging behavior. The researchers were using eye scan technology to see which child the teachers were looking at the most. And what they found is that the teachers, both white and black alike, spent the most time watching the black boy, waiting for bad behavior that never came. There's one more really interesting headline in this study, which comes later. The teachers were also given a one-paragraph description to read of a hypothetical child with a stereotypical name who behaves pretty badly in class, pushes, scratches, throws toys. And some of the teachers were also given some biographical information that helped make sense of that behavior. They were told that the child lives with his mother, father has been in and out for years, they're relatively poor, the mother is depressed, works 3 jobs. Researchers wanted to know if knowing this information made the teachers more empathetic to the kid. Well, here's the shock. It did, but only if the teacher and the child were of the same race. If the teacher and the child, a white teacher and a black child, or even a black teacher and a white child, knowing that biographical information, those teachers were less empathetic towards those students. And here's why this matters. Imagine if this is true, if there's this empathy deficit in preschool, well, imagine where else that's true.
Thank you. So just to quickly wrap up, I think the takeaways from today are shame, moral injury, the concept of 1,000 tiny cuts, the concept that all of us are complicit in this. And what do we do about this? As Amy said, one, we need to recognize this and acknowledge it. And none of us, not one of us, whether we are a person of color or a white person, is not in the fishbowl. All of us are in the fishbowl. We also need to differentiate racism from other forms of unfair treatment. We also need to think about what some of the messages are, both the interpersonal messages and then the larger social media-driven messages, and replace those, counter them with positive messages. This is why things like a culturally responsive curriculum, like inclusive workspaces,
Pros again.
are critically important. We also need to think about how we train people to both hear the language of others and to hear their own language, to think about the language and behaviors of others, and to think about their own behaviors. And finally, to take people seriously when they talk about and indicate a concern about racism. One final point about a slide that we did not go over, but I will quickly summarize for you. Years ago in the 1930s, a researcher, psychologist, Kenneth Clark, and his wife did a study. It's a famous study called the Clark Doll Study. And it was as a result of that, that study was entered into the portfolio of evidence in support of Brown and the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. But what Professor Clark did was show kids a variety of different, well, 2 different dolls, a black doll and a white doll, and ask kids of both races, which doll is the nice doll? Which doll do you want to play with? Which doll is the smart doll? And they all said the white doll. When he said, which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the stupid doll? Which doll do you not want to play with? The kids all said the black doll. Then he asked the heartbreaking question, which doll looks most like you? And for the black children, the doll that they had ascribed the negative qualities to was also the doll that they said was most like them. That happened in the 1930s. This study has been replicated almost every 5 years. The last time there was a large replication of it was about 2016, and the results were exactly the same. So this is truly viral. This is truly the fishbowl that we all live in. And all of us have to do better on this. So please think about the what to do slide. We've given you a lot of material that you're not going to digest all in one moment. So please think about that. And we will stay on for the next few minutes, next 10 minutes or so, if anyone has anything they do want to talk about that they want to explore more or would prefer not to address to the larger group. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for sticking through this. Thank you for leaning into this difficult material. So enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. And as my friend Josh Croak says, onward. Thank you.
That was awesome, Jen.
Oh, thank you, Amy.
As usual.
Thank you both. Thank you all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
It was really good.
Good. Thank you.
I couldn't help, when you were talking about the doll experiment, thinking about Disney movies.
Oh,
and
yes.
some of the early things that kids grow up watching, and who's always the superhero and who's always the villain.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that could be a whole other session.
Well, that whole question of, what's in the media, I think like even now, there's, a lot of people rave about, and this is my own pet peeve, rave about the show Modern Family. I can't bear that show, with the stereotypical hypersexualized Latina and the wisecracking little Asian kid. It's just, every stereotype plays out in that, but it's against a background that this is cute and funny. There's nothing cute and funny about that. So.
I haven't actually seen it. I've heard a few people say it was a good show.
I haven't seen it either, but mostly had heard a much more positive critique that it was like this view of multiculturalism and all these cultures in one family. And
they do bring up all of these issues, but the characters are so stereotyped. There is the gay couple that have adopted the Asian child. There's the older white man and his young, hot mama Latino wife, and the like nerdy Latino son who's supposed to be funny because he's a nerdy Latino. I find it irritating. So
I think I would probably agree with you. It sounds a little irritating. Ruth, would you mind saying again about what you said earlier about the report that the census and that was the first I heard of it, and it sounds like it was a really important piece of information we should pay attention to.
And you're on mute.
Yeah, the U.S. Census Bureau came out with a report, and you can all Google it. The headline is the 10 worst states for Latinos to live in. Massachusetts is the worst one. We have the highest Latino youth incarceration. And I know that as someone who has been fighting this whole school system, the MCAS is a school to prison pipeline. We know that. We have the highest Latino youth school dropout. Banks don't give us loans, so we have the lowest home ownership. The health service are the worst for us. And as we have noticed with the pandemic, that, it's all over the state of Massachusetts. Latinos, we are the ones that have been the worst affected by it. and it goes on. So, you know, you can Google it. One of the things I did was I had a conversation with Congressman McGovern, and he agreed to my request. So we're planning on doing a forum to discuss these issues. And I'm waiting for his staff to set up the meeting. So, but I just want to end on one, and it's a personal issue. And I know my daughters are not, you know, my ex-husband is Irish. We had 2 daughters. Our firstborn came out blonde, very white. And I named her Kelly because my mother-in-law maiden name was Kelly. So Kelly Marie Faye, how Irish can you be, right? A year later, we had our second child, my mini-me, brown skin, black curly hair. And they were always together in the Worcester Public School. How do you think my white privileged looking daughter was treated as opposed to my dark brown daughter? In 3rd grade, Kelly was placed in the gifted program. And throughout her whole schooling, she was always, you know, intellectually, you know, being challenged. Not so with my brown skinned daughter. If their father and I had not been involved in both of their education, I can assure you that my brown skinned daughter would have been the statistic of the dropout that we see in the Worcester Public School among Blacks and Latinos. So when John Manfredo says, you know, my 40 years of working in the Worcester Public School, I never saw any racism, really, you know? And this is what I want to do is I want to reach out to my white community, you know, and my friends, because this is what I find. We have a pandemic of racism and inhumanity. And I want to introduce a vaccine of love and humanity so that we can come together. And you know, I mean, you know, I also taught at Chandler Magnet in kindergarten, the 2-way. Do you know how beautiful it was to see 5-year-old blonde, blue eyes, little boys, you know, talking to little Juan, trying to, you know, practice his Spanish, and then the Puerto Rican young boy practicing the English. Our young people, they don't have that racism. We need to start early so that we can end this.
And Ruth, that goes to what Jen was saying about the authorities, say like sanctioning or not sanctioning. We know that in our city, people who have a lot of authority are saying racism's not real. That's not a thing. And the fact that our community has continued to tolerate that makes it much less surprising that we're the worst place to live. Like, right? It absolutely shocks me that people are allowed to say they have not seen racism in this city. Really? Then
I'm feeling hopeful because Ed has finally admitted, and you know, he's putting together a committee to, you know, to kind to deal. So I'm hoping that this time it happens, because I've worked in so many committees in Worcester for years, and things happen and we suggest, but then, you know, we go back, you know, to the old ways.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Okay, I've got another meeting, so I've got to scoot. But, you know, if anyone wants to follow up, you all know how to reach me. All right.
Yeah. Ruth, be in touch. Well, we want to support you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jen.
I don't know if people want to still stick around or if we can should we call it a day? It's a big topic. It's a tough. Mary, look, there you are. Yay. Nice to see you.
We could talk about this all day. One of the things that I struggle with right now is people who doesn't, so there are people who experience racism that don't necessarily see it as that, which is when internalized racism has taken place, you don't necessarily see what's being done to you as part of a racist experience. And I you have to meet people where they're at. and it's difficult to to breach that communication of respecting where people are at, but also trying to convey the fact that this is happening and this is very real, and getting past it, moving forward with that understanding. Yeah.
Agreed. Ruth, thanks again for putting yourself out there too, with talking about how painful it is when you're experiencing it firsthand and as a mother. And it's hard to hear, but people need to see what's happening. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. So grateful that people continue to care about issues that may or may not impact them. They just keep showing up. It's wonderful. And we really appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.